Hello, everyone. Books with Banks back again, and this time I am so grateful to be joined by my guest, Philip Chase. How are you?
I'm fine, Alex. It's great to be here.
Uh, do you have anything to say about your nemesis? No. Thank you so much, AP, for joining me again, uh, and for playing along with the bit.
It's I think everyone should have the head of their nemesis on a stick.
Uh-huh.
It's one of the things that we just need to do now.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so for everyone watching, this video idea sort of came about because I started to break down episode by episode, just sort of brief summaries of what might be covered in a Malazan TV show adaptation. And this wasn't the most realistic breakdown, it was more just the dream hypothetical scenario. And I posted the first video for like what season 1 and 2 would be, and I got a ton of wonderful feedback, including some wonderful comments, really thought-provoking stuff from AP from A Critical Dragon. And instead of just kind of continuing with that same format, talking about future seasons or how I think they might be structured, I think this might work out a little better. Us just being able to bounce ideas off of each other, talking about what Malazan would look like on television. Yeah. So yes, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, obviously, this is one of those topics that I love discussing because it's entirely a hypothetical, and it's wonderful because you exercise your imagination in how you would translate the book to screen. And one of the things that frequently comes up when people talk about adaptations, and they go, "Oh, this would be brilliant as a TV show." And you go, "Okay, what kind of TV show?" You go, "What do you mean? I mean a TV show, like on HBO." And you go, "Okay, so an hour-long episode like The Sopranos, or do you mean a 45-minute episode? And how many episodes in a season? And how many seasons?"
Right.
Well, why are these important questions? And you go, "Because that dictates the entire structure of the adaptation."
Yeah.
And this is one of those, like, we can have dream castings about who we would put in various roles, and that's fun, and it gets everyone engaged, and you think of all of these different actors, and quite often it reflects like how we're trying to picture the characters in our own minds, and that's great. But when we're talking about adaptation, if we're seriously going to consider it and we're going to go, "Oh, it'd be great if we could do this," it's not enough to say it should be anime, or it should be animated,
Yeah.
or it should be a film, or it should be a TV show, because every single one of those choices has significant ramifications, not only on the style, the tone, how you structure because the book is not structured like a film. It isn't. You would have to change sections of the book to fit it down to 90 minutes, or if you're going to be generous, 120. But if you're going to make it a 2-hour movie, that's structured very, very differently than if you have an 8-hour TV show. Or if you're making an animated series where each episode is 30 minutes, well, that you don't just take the length of it, chop it into 30-minute
Right.
chunks, because that wouldn't work. The scene breaks would be in the wrong place, the tension would be all over the place. But we actually have to think about it as, if we were sitting down to view it and we viewed an episode, is it going to create a satisfactory episode of TV? And that is, for me, one of the fascinating things about adaptation, is thinking about who's the audience for this? What type of adaptation is this? What style of adaptation? What tone of adaptation? And then considering the practicalities of the the structure. How much time do we have, and how is that time broken up? How can we apply all of that to this novel and create something that is going to be enjoyable for a first-time viewer who knows nothing about the world, is going to be enjoyable for someone who's read the series once, and is going to be enjoyable for someone who is a hardcore fan who can quote entire chapters worth of material. How do you design something like that? And what are the compromises that you have to make? Because you have to make some. And that just turns it into such this complex body of interrelated questions that suddenly there are all of these different directions you should go, and each one has strengths and each one has weaknesses, and that's where I find the joy in discussing.
Yeah, so I think one of those particularly specific questions that or considerations that you brought up in the comment thread in the first video that I hadn't mentioned and it really got me thinking was, should this all be released at one time? Should a few episodes be released together and then maybe one after that, like a Disney Plus show, or should it be one episode once a week? And I think for if I'm thinking about the shows that I enjoy and how I enjoy conversation around watching shows and chatting with other people about yeah, what I've seen, that typical like water cooler conversation the next day is I think I would love for Malazan to be one episode once a week. But then, even in the structure that I broke down, where it gets complicated, is I had episode to episode changing setting and cast of characters back and forth. And so people might have to go 2-3 weeks then without being reunited with the people from episode one. So, yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. And I'm curious if you have a particular style that you think Malazan, or a particular episode release style that you think would best suit Malazan.
Well, like all of these things, there's a difference between personal preference and then something that will work well. And I think regardless of which one you pick, you will always have a certain segment of the audience and the fandom that like it. And there will always be a certain segment of the audience and the fandom who will hate it. Because no matter what you pick, guaranteed that's going to happen. So you resign yourself to, there is no one perfect way to do it. There is the best possible way that you can. And if you think of like some of the shows that have been released in the last few years, starting out with like a feature-length pilot, where maybe they take a couple of episodes, release them all at one time so people can binge the start of it, and then a weekly release. And people love that. They love being able to sit down and, oh, I'm going to sit and watch this, and this is great. And it ties into that streaming that we've gotten used to of, I can watch this whenever I want, and I can watch as many episodes as I want. But the downside to that is whenever they reach the end of the lump that got downloaded at the start or released at the start, it's, well, now I don't want to wait. Right. So it actually creates frustration in your audience. Right. If you start with, here's episode 1 and the next episode isn't until next week, at least you've created the expectation that they're going to have to wait. But you run the risk of, well, this wasn't enough to keep me viewing.
Right.
That I needed another couple of episodes. And the older the fan base, the older the intended audience, the target audience, the more likely that target audience is going to remember and respond to weekly release. Uh-huh. More likely, the younger the audience, the more likely they are going to want the bingeable, download it all in one go. And so it gets released on a Friday morning at 1 minute past midnight, basically on the Thursday, 1 minute past midnight. They release on the Friday morning. And you know that if you looked at the number of minutes that someone is going to watch this on speed and a half, record a review of the entire season and have it uploaded before the rest of the world has woken up that morning. Right. Because everything is about getting, watching it all first, getting your review done and getting it up online and engaging in that, being first and watching it all. People setting alarms to get up really early in the morning to watch the premiere of something and to watch as much of it as they can before they actually have to go about their day, or taking a day off work so that they can spend all day watching. This happens now. It's a phenomenon of the streaming approach to television and narrative. And if you're going to have that release everything all at once, how you structure the show, you might actually think of it a bit differently, because you go, right, but if it's all being released at once, it's being released as a giant long form, as opposed to a weekly breakdown of things. And even in that, if it's a weekly breakdown, you know there's going to be speculation about every single aspect that came up in that show, and that people online will talk. And when you have a million people online discussing every single frame that you've put up there, how do you hide things?
Right.
How do you create surprises?
Right.
So I think there are pros and cons to both approaches. If you release it all at once, then people can still have that surprise, but it lasts a much shorter time, because immediately then the conversation is about, well, I've watched the whole season. If you release it weekly, then you run the risk of people going, oh, well, like, I'll wait until the whole season is out.
Right.
And then like the people who are, the production team and the studio that's releasing it are going, well, the viewing numbers aren't great for the first episode. That's the big episode. Why are the viewing numbers terrible? And oh, well, everyone's waiting until the end of the season. You go, that's no good. They've made the decision to cancel it now. Right. And lo and behold, we don't get a second season.
Yeah.
And there's all of these very strange dynamics that go into it about our own personal desires as viewers, as well as the structure of the industry. And we know that the industry is changing and morphing and trying to deal with new technology and new approaches.
Yeah, maybe kind of on that thread. I might be more inclined to wish for one episode a week, because of especially now with the recent writer's strike happening again. And I haven't looked too much into it. I don't know if you've been keeping up with the Writers Guild going on strike, and some of the complaints that I saw that they issued, or they had to do with the fact that no writers are guaranteed work for too long a stretch of time anymore, and they're just going to hire these freelance writers for every new show, every new season. And yeah,
well, I think at the core of a lot of the complaints that the Writers Guild have is that writers are now being treated as disposable gig workers, where someone says, I need you to write 8 scripts. So you're sitting at home, you write your 8 scripts, you send it in, they go, right, that's you done.
Yeah.
And there's no interaction with production. There's no interaction with the director. There's no interaction with the other writers. That you just get your spec, you do your job, and then go. Whereas if you think of how writing on TV used to work, you had a writer's room. So you had someone who was in charge of what was happening in the season and juggling things. There were specific things sent to each person. You had story editors who are working to make sure what happened in episode 3. And you mentioned it in episode 5, that when episode 3 got changed, the dialogue got changed down on the production floor when they were filming and they made changes. But those changes are reflected in the script for episode 5. That these are all writing jobs. And when you have writers that, you have to have healthcare. And so when you're employed, your employer in the States is, you have health insurance via your employer. Isn't that how it works in the States?
Yeah.
And so if you're self-employed as just a writer doing a gig, you're having to pay for that yourself. So, okay, now you have to increase your rates. And then they go, oh, but there are loads of writers out there. So not only are you doing away with writers working together, learning from each other and getting better every single day, people paying attention to continuity, writers spending time down on set with the set designers, with the director, with the cinematographer, and them looking at a direction that's in the script that you do realize that will never work, because think of how this thing is. Writers have to learn all of these different aspects of how the TV show is put together or the film is put together in order to create better scripts that reflect the reality of what can be done. And it's this transition and this education of writers. And this is how you get really good TV, when you have all of the different aspects of the TV production working together as a big creative unit. As soon as you start splintering it all off, you have, well, oh, we already got the set designers. They designed those sets. They built them. They're in storage. We'll just put them up whenever. You're like, no, you want, and what if something goes wrong? What if you want to change something? And that's, I think, one of the big things when writers are there, when you have them there all season. If an actor wants to change a line, you go, right, the reason that line is there, it might seem out of character here, but in 3 episodes, it's going to bear fruit. That's a breadcrumb for later on. That's a seed we are planting now for a big reveal later on. And the reason for that is your backstory hasn't been revealed to the audience yet. It hasn't come up yet. But in that, remember that your backstory includes this thing. And the writer is there to explain the process to the actor. And then the actor can go, oh no, but I was thinking about it more that way. And the writer might go, actually, that's a really good idea. Let me incorporate that. They go back up, they alter scripts, they make sure it's the through lines all the way through. Writers create everything that is going to be filmed. Costume designers interact with that. The set designers, the cinematographer, the director, everything flows from the writing. And yet we all know it's a dynamic process. So having the writers there when you make changes, when a director goes, I know we've done the thing it said to do in the script, but I have this idea. And they shoot the idea and they go, the idea is brilliant. And then they go, does that actually fit with what is meant to be accomplished in this episode? That's why you have writers on set. And people seem to think that, oh, just because there's a lead writer or the 2 people who are credited as the writers, but there's an entire writer's room of continuity and editing and all of this. These are all writing jobs. And someone might even say, right, you sit, that actor wants to change a lot of their dialogue. You go sit with that actor. You know what the outline is. You know what we're doing. Work with the actor so that we can get the dialogue for that character that fits what we need in the scene, but they're comfortable delivering. That's a writing job. And the idea that someone is just going to write a script and send it in and someone just films it while someone else just acts it, that is not a reflection of how film and TV are made. So I've a lot of, and one of the big criticisms that a lot of fans have online is like, oh, the writing is terrible. And you go, right, so you want to make it worse? one of the big complaints that people have is they don't like the way writing is being done at the minute. And you go, guess what? That's why they're striking, because a lot of stuff is parceled out like this. And they're doing away with writers' rooms. And people are striking. They're sending the script in, and then people are making some changes, and other people are making different changes. But this is what they are striking against.
Right.
They want to have more cohesive writers' rooms. And that ultimately will lead to better TV shows, better films. I think this is something that, like, even people who hate the writing at the minute, you go, this is how we get better writing. So it's complicated and it's not easy. And I think that there has to be an awareness that the writer doesn't just write up a script and that's it. And I think sometimes in discussions, that's what people think writing a TV show is, that you sit and you just write out the scene and the dialogue, because we've all seen those scripts. We've seen scripts online. We've seen examples of this. You know, yeah, but there's a lot goes into that process that we're not aware of looking at the finished product. And that, I think, is such an important point in this whole discussion. And given how much we love film and television, how much we rely on it, rewarding those involved in the creation of it seems the least that we can do.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, and of course, you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But have you had any conversations with Erickson or Esselman about what their preferences would be for those like writing room situations, how involved, if they were ever given the opportunity to help with an adaptation.
Of course, Erickson and Esselman and I have talked about this. Like, I think it's the dream of a lot of people, particularly like Erickson and Esselman started out writing screenplays,
Right, right.
and they, I think they sold a couple. They got a couple that were in pre-production, and pilots were being made. Various things like that happened, and but none of them ever took off, and it was becoming frustrating. And they then decided to break the world up, the different storylines up, and write novels in the world. So, of course, we've talked about different ways that it could be adapted and how we would like to see it, and all of these things, because there's no one around knows and loves this world more than Erickson and Esselman. Like, they they are its number one fans. Um, and like, I remember Erickson one time talked about like an ideal way if money were no object whatsoever. Like if we were sitting here with Jeff Bezos kind of money and went, you know what, I want to spend whatever on this. That you took Gardens of the Moon and you turned it into 3 films, and you filmed all 3 films at the same time. And then you took Dead House Gates and you turned it into 3 films, and you filmed all 3 at the same time. But at the same time that you were filming Gardens of the Moon. So you're actually filming 6 films all at once. Then you started releasing them. And they were released like every 3 months or every 4 months. That you got yourself the like a 2-year lead of getting all of the stuff filmed, giving the special effects artists time to work on it, that you were free and clear on 2 full films. So while you were working on the 3rd and 4th, that's when you started releasing the first film, and you released them every few months. So it became almost like the old time serial, except in cinema form. That it got released and it was in the cinema for 3 months and or whatever, a month, and then when it left, there was only 2 months, and then the next one was coming out, and it was in it for a month, and then the next one would come out, and you just built this momentum of watching all of this. And the thing is, this would have been like absolutely ludicrous to even consider until Peter Jackson did something similar with The Lord of the Rings. He filmed all 3 films at the same time.
And yeah, I would even say Marvel has made something like that a little more realistic, or a little more realistic, but
and that's the thing. When Erickson first discussed it, people were like, "Oh, that's just absolutely ridiculous." But you look at how technology has changed. You look at how the approach to filmmaking has continued to evolve, and new things can be done. And you go, it's not as ludicrous now as it sounded. Now, is it still absolute pie in the sky? Yeah, it's absolute pie in the sky. But it now has a veneer of possibility to it that it didn't have when Erickson first sort of like was pitching ideas around in his head, and we're just sitting there having a chat one day, going, "Wouldn't it be cool if?"
Yeah.
But animation. I remember on a fan discussion, someone said it has to be animated. You couldn't do it in live action. You know, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Oh well, okay, that could be live action. Game of Thrones. Okay, that could be live action. Willow. Okay, that could be live. Wheel of Time. That could be live action. Rings of Power. Well, that could be live action. But you know, Malazan is the only fantasy property ever that could never be live action.
Right, which is bizarre.
If anything, it's becoming easier and easier to do things live action.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't prefer an animated form, or that you necessarily liked the direction that they took a lot of the live action stuff in. There are pros and cons to all of these different approaches. But to say it couldn't be live action, you're like, no, it can be live action. There's no reason it can't be. Marvel has shown that you can do live action with the weird and the wonderful. Even if you don't like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania,
Right.
that's an entire weird world with weird creatures and the weird scale. What there is so impossible to do in Malazan that hasn't already been done, at least in theory, in something like Ant-Man Quantumania.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Um, but when they talk about animation, people, oh, it has to be animated. Well, oh, it has to be anime. Right. Well, what style of anime?
Yeah.
Like Studio Ghibli? That style is entirely wrong for the tone of Malazan, at least how I see it in my head. If you did a Studio Ghibli version of Gardens of the Moon, you, like,
That'd be
is
strange.
that sitting easily in your mind? Or you go, oh, no, what I mean is like Arcane. And you go, okay, so Arcane isn't really anime, it's animated and
Right.
it's 3D animation.
Yeah.
But do you mean in the style of Arcane, or do you just mean 3D animation? Because the style of Arcane that had that hyper saturated warm colors for the above world, and then the neon punk aesthetic of the underground world. Which one of those two aesthetics are you applying to the Malazan color scheme?
Yeah.
Because none of that seems like Malazan. The crazy camera angles going in on the slightly mad character. Well, no, is that how you see the scene, say, with Hairlock?
Right.
How would you do? What is it about that style, or is it I liked Arcane? I want them to do Malazan, and Arcane is one that I like, so they should just do Arcane but Malazan. And you go, but tonally and stylistically, they're very, very different. How would you do it? How would you go about it? What is the thing? Do you want it more like Akira or Ghost in the Shell? But those are very cyberpunk aesthetics. The style of it, the tone of it, the color of it, even that animation side, that is leaning into cyberpunk. Does that fit with the Malazan world? You know, so when people say it should just be, what I'm actually interested in is, well, okay, let's take that. How could we make that be? What are we taking out of that? How would that make Gardens of the Moon look or Dead House Gates look? Would what would we do with it? How would it fit? Because to me, it's not just sort of making oh yeah, well, I just want it animated because I enjoy animated, or I want anime because I enjoy that specific type of animation, or I want it live action because I prefer live action. That we actually think about those elements and what they add or detract.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like when when people are considering what format would work best or what styles would work best, the series is so, like any stylistic decisions have to consider Toll of the Hound or have to consider Dust of Dreams. And like it can't just be how do we want Gardens of the Moon to look? Because maybe someone might feel like the setting of Darujistan and Pale, like these places might work better in animation. But then the next season we're going to Seven Cities, and I'm not sure that would work well animated at all. Or I I'm not sure. I would imagine the Dead House Gate season being very kind of
Ochre.
sandy and brown and
Ochre. The word you're looking for is ochre.
yeah, ochre, yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, and I don't really imagine that being a big part of the Gardens of the Moon color palette. So they have to, yeah.
Yeah. So, but even considering that, so now you see, like, when you're planning out an adaptation, okay, let's say for the sake of argument, we've been greenlit as the showrunners to
Woo!
adapt any way that we want Gardens of the Moon
Uh-huh.
and the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And the thing is, we know if we do a good job with Gardens of the Moon, they've said we're going to give you enough money for Gardens of the Moon, and you have a blank checkbook. You can do Gardens of the Moon with a blank checkbook. But if it doesn't make its money back, then you don't get anything else. So do we focus on just Gardens of the Moon, or do we think, right, we're going to do it so well, we are going to make money back, which means we get Dead House Gates and the rest of them. So let's plan out what's going to fit for the entirety of the series for all 10 seasons. Let's do that. You go, okay, right, great. That's what we're going to do. So you start making decisions about Gardens of the Moon and season 1 that's going to impact season 10 and the Cripple God. You start going, right, it's live action. Right, we're doing that. How are we going to portray the Taistandi?
Right.
If it's live action, okay, we have alien onyx skin figures. Now, we can't really have a bunch of white guys in
Right.
blackface.
Right.
Even though these are alien creatures, like they're not human, and the black color of their skin is not meant to be a human skin tone.
Right.
Can we do that? You go, right, because that's gonna impact certain decisions. What about the Nappans? They're gonna be blue. Okay. Jagat, the Jagat are gonna be in it. How are we going to do that? How are they going to look? The Imas, how are we doing the Talan and Imas again?
Right, because we can't have it look like Pirates of the Caribbean.
And so there are a lot of design decisions that you make, and then you go, right, well, if we're doing it live action, we want to limit the number of actors who we are paying as the star actors who have salaried lines and all of this. And like we're going to be asking them to sign up for 11 years, some of them. Not all of them, obviously.
Right.
Because who you cast in season 1, let's say for the sake of argument, so we don't have spoilers for anyone.
Yeah.
There is a character called Jimmy the Hand.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy the Hand, we are casting this actor in season 1. And Jimmy the Hand appears in The Cripple God at the end. Right. So we need that actor to sign a contract for all of this time.
Right.
How much time are they in the rest of the books? Oh,
they're in 2 of them.
not a lot.
Yeah.
Is there any way we can find another character who's in the books that Jimmy's not in, but can do the same sort of role as in the same place? Can we start squishing a couple of the characters together? Is every single incident that Jimmy's involved in necessary? Because if we can get rid of that one character, that saves us money on the production, and also trying to get an actor for season 1 and season 10 only. That can be complicated. Right. So you start trying to maybe plan these things out. And then you think, well, in that sequence, we have in the book, there's a nighttime battle, and then there's another nighttime battle, and then there's another nighttime battle. So that's going to be 3 episodes of nighttime battles. Can we maybe intermix some daytime stuff to change it up a bit? So we change the sequence of the books. Mm-hmm. Oh, you can't do that. Then you're not being faithful. And then you think, well, what if we take, there's a bunch of soldier characters there. Yes, they are bridge burners. There's a bunch of soldier characters there who are different bridge burners. Can we make them all the same bridge burners? Is that going to change things? And then someone in the background goes, it does. Yeah. So it's being aware how these things can shuffle over time when you take into those practicalities. You go, well, you wouldn't have any of these issues if it was animated. You go, okay, so the technology to animate, and if we think of even very popular animations, the repetition in the background, or the background where characters are still or just going through a slightly repetitive motion to save on the computing power needed to animate it, or to save on all of these things. And you go, so it actually only focuses on 1 or 2 people doing things at once. You can actually have much more energetic backgrounds and things in live action because you can have a bunch of extras. And so there are strengths and weaknesses to this. And there are practical considerations. And it's whether you think of the whole 10 arc or 10 season arc, or if you're just looking at one book. And that makes it interesting. And as you pointed out, Dead House Gates, a lot of ochre.
Yes.
Is there another book that maybe we could intercut Dead House Gates with that has a different setting?
Sure. Yeah.
So maybe Dead House Gates is not the entirety of season 2. What if season 2 bounced between Dead House Gates, and
Yeah.
another book.
And the parallel.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, would that then be, would you curtail Dead House Gates in that book? Would you shrink them down? Or would you have it then be 2 seasons?
Yeah. I
And
mean, I can tell you almost all the fans are probably gonna say have it be 2 seasons, but again, if they're looking at, okay, this is 10 years, how long's the contract? If any way we can shave some years off of that, any way we can get it down a season or two, I could see that. I could also see, say there's certain things, a certain storyline in the fourth book that probably one of the main stories of the fourth book, that its sort of big climax isn't until the sixth book, earlier on in the sixth one. So I could definitely see a writer's room wanting to condense that all into one season. Um,
and that's it. When you start thinking about it structurally, when you look at when you start going, okay, here's a character arc. And let's look at this one character from book one, and we're going to trace their arc out of where they go. And this character, we're going to trace their arc, and then this. So you can do character arcs and see where they go. And then you can go, okay, let's look at story arcs, story threads. Here's this as a group doing this thing. Here's this doing this thing. Let's have a look at it thematically. What's being expressed? Let's look at it dramatically. Let's see where action is, where drama is, where action is. There are all these different ways to break down the book and the series. And then you can look at it chronologically, where you take all of those plot elements and you rearrange them into the actual chronological sequence of events and go, here is a timeline for all of these events. Would it be better to forget the structure of the novels and rearrange everything into a chronology and tell the story chronologically? So season one is no longer Gardens of the Moon.
no, no. Yeah.
And you can just imagine there are a whole lot of fans out there going, why would you do that? And then other fans going, oh, that'd be so cool.
Uh,
And that's the thing. I am sure there would be some, if we took the story of the 10 books and we rearranged it chronologically and we brought in elements of Esselmont's books to fill out that chronological sequence, so it actually filled a lot of things in, and we combined the two, you go, right, here's a brilliant chronological sequence. There would be, as we have seen with lots of stuff, that's different to how it is in the book. They're not being faithful to the book. They're just taking this thing from later on and moving it to there. Why did they do that? Why did they change that?
right.
And yet, just in this discussion, you can see why a writer's room might go, but that would be a really cool way to do it. It would make it a lot easier for someone who hasn't read the books to watch the series, because now it's chronological. It's a way that you expect a story to be told. Maybe that would work.
And I do think maybe on that note, I think this might be a little dramatic, but any adaptation, brace yourself, any adaptation would have to deal with the Gardens of the Moon problem, or the I think most of us fans wouldn't think of it as a problem, but I do think a lot of people trying to get into the book series often hear from other fans, or at least others that have read Gardens of the Moon, that it is one of the more difficult books to get into, that everybody likes the other books in the series more than the first book. So I think if that already weighs on some people's minds when they're like about to jump into the series and they're like, oh, well, I haven't heard that the first book is amazing. Again, I'm pretty sure you and I probably both love Gardens of the Moon. But I do think that's a very commonly held belief. And I think any adaptation, a point in favor of doing the chronological order might be to not start with Gardens of the Moon.
So you're talking about because Gardens of the Moon effectively starts in media res.
That and just even without any detailed reasons as to why it's some people's least favorite. I do think, at least in this corner of booktube, you hear a lot of people with a little more trepidation going or with the first book compared to the rest of the series. I think that would carry over or could carry over to the show.
Well, one of the interesting things is we are actually most people who watch film and TV are actually very good at picking up, particularly if it's well acted, unconscious or subconscious cues. Like that's what sells an actor's performance. Yes, they can deliver lines and they can strike the poses, but if they really sell the performance, we buy into it. So when someone says something and they're lying, that gets conveyed and the viewer sees that they are lying and they go, oh, I wonder what they're lying about. We pick up on it a lot easier. The second thing is because we are seeing it on screen, quite often we don't question it as much. So, for instance, a lot of readers, when particularly now reading fantasy, have an expectation or a desire that the magic that people are using is explained. They want that mechanic of, well, explain how this magic works. But if you see someone using it and you see all of this stuff, you are aware of what it does, and you see it as the spectacle that it might be, and you get a sense of it, and you feel more comfortable with people using magic without it needing to be explained. That's something that it's typically more common in books than it is on screen. Because you can just imagine on screen if they went, and now we're going to have a whole sequence explaining how the magic works, and a lot of it. Well, that was good, but like I didn't really need that. Like, so they wave their hands. I can see them waving their hands. I get it. Like I see what they're doing. There are ways to convey stuff visually to embed knowledge in a reader's mind, but also with starting in media res, you can add in like a couple of lines of dialogue that make things clearer, and suddenly with a tweak of dialogue here or a tweak of dialogue there, add in one scene. So if you imagine at the start of Gardens of the Moon, when Ganos crashes the horse down into the Imperial throne room, what if that sequence was 1 minute longer? What if his audience with Lysine was 1 minute longer? Or even as he left, the camera lingered on Lysine, and Lysine issued orders about what was going to happen in Peel.
Yeah. Well.
And you go there for a couple of extra seconds. Then when we move to Peel, it's not suddenly, oh, what's going on? I don't know who anyone is. It's like we saw the person sitting in the throne going, go and do that thing, go and invade, and blah blah blah, or whatever. Yes, that's a change in the book. Yes, it would be unfaithful to the text, but for viewers, it explains things perfectly. But even then, remember the Marines and the Malazan soldiers are all going to be wearing identifiable armor, and that's the armor we see Ganos wearing and everyone else wearing. So when we go to Peel, we see it's all of the Malazans, and you go, right, well, I know who these guys are.
Right.
You visually recognize them.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that you don't know who Tattersail is, because she's standing with the Malazans. And then as soon as she starts doing magic, oh, she's a mage on the side of the Malazans. None of it needs explained. So this is one of the great joys of the visual medium, is that you can show people things and you can put in visual cues that people pick up on. Think of the number of TV shows where, say, there's a certain character, and no matter what outfit they are wearing, they always seem to be wearing like a blue top.
Right.
And it could be a shirt, it could be a t-shirt, or if they're wearing a white t-shirt, they just so happen to be wearing a blue jacket. That for whatever quirk of costuming, the color blue is always associated with that character. So whenever they are on screen, you immediately notice them. You identify them. They're always clear on screen. And then that character, their evil twin appears, mwah, and they wear red.
Right.
There are lots of, now that is a very bold example, but you know what I mean, that in all of those fantasy shows or even science fiction shows where you have like the army guys, the Marines or whoever, and they're all wearing armor, but each one of them has slightly individual armor that one of them has like two sort of weapon belts coming down. One has a bandana. One has an armband. That there's always something that is visually distinct about each one. So even though they're all meant to be in uniform, they're all wearing the same thing. They actually aren't.
Mhm.
It just they all look similar enough that they could be confused as being the same. But actually, there's usually at least one key identifier for each one of them. Um, and that goes a long way to conveying information to a reader that you don't have to spell out, because you can do it visually, and that's how viewers pick up on it. Whereas with readers, you have to say what they are wearing,
Right.
and you don't want, oh, and then the squad came in, so this is the first person, and this is what they were wearing, and they were wearing this, and then the next person, this is what they looked like. They are very different ways of communicating narrative. But at the same time, the audiovisual thing, it's harder to show what's going on in a character's head. So again, you know, swings and roundabouts, pros and cons.
Yeah.
Do you put in a voiceover?
Right.
Oh, and like there will be people out there go, oh, don't do a voiceover.
Yeah.
You know, Gano's parent going, it was my first day arriving in day one. Hail. I arrived on the back of a quad. You know,
Gano's diaries.
dear diary, today I arrived in Peel.
And there's this little girl that was freaking me out.
Stop it.
Sorry.
This is fun. Like, do you show like if would you show the Imperial Warren in like very early on, or would you leave that until much later reveal?
Yeah.
Because you don't really need it. So would you spend time building a set and designing it all for that brief little glimpse, or would you go, we'll find a different way around that? We'll just do a cut of, yes, we're going this way. That took some time. And have them like their clothing's dusty and they have a bit of grime and just next scene stuff. Pass through this magic portal, and we don't see what's on the other side. We just see them vanish into it. And then we see them come out of a different. And he's like, "The hell was that?" He's like, "Oh, we'll talk about it later." You can fudge things. You don't have to show every single thing that's on the page, as long as you are conveying the essence of the story, and or you're changing it in a way to make the grander story approachable to a new audience. And these are the things that I think sometimes as book readers we get very, very fixated on. It must have this scene, it must have this scene. How could you skip that? That's how that character was introduced. And you go, but that character doesn't need to be introduced there. That character needs to be introduced by here, which is 2 books later. They actually add nothing to that scene. So why use them? Why not use one of the other characters? Well, because that's how it is in the book. And which creates more drama for the story on the screen, which creates more impact for the story on the screen. And you go, okay, well, this makes it easier on production. Because it's easier on production, it was slightly cheaper. Because it was slightly cheaper, they got to spend a bit more money on that thing. Because we have to balance budget with all of this talk as well.
Yeah.
And around it goes. And that's why sometimes we go, oh, the writing is awful, as this sort of blanket criticism of a show that someone doesn't like. And you go, yeah, there were mistakes with the writing, but were those mistakes in the script? Or was that there was a scene filmed, but it was cut in editing? Or did the CGI just not work, or did the effects not work? And they decided we'd rather spend the money on the effects for this thing. Or, there are a lot of decisions go into what is the finished product on the screen. Director's input, actors' input, producers, editors. All of these things have input. And as we've seen with the writer's strike, sometimes it's done without the writer's knowledge. Or they make a decision, and because they don't have a writer's room, the story editor, someone's gone, you do realize earlier on you said you couldn't do that. But it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like, one of the questions I had for you
Yeah.
was, were you thinking of it as an hour-long episode, a 45-minute episode, or a half-hour episode?
I was thinking hour-long episodes. Getting
With
back
ad breaks or
to
without ad breaks?
without ad breaks, I think. Yes, yes. But I so a big reason why the dream preference in my mind, that like this imagination or this imagined version, um the reason it is the way that it is, and I'm sure this is the same for many people who have the same sort of dreams, is that my favorite shows are in that format. Like the shows that I really enjoy were on, or a lot of them have been on HBO, have been hour-long episodes. Um, yeah, yeah. So that definitely influenced why I would prefer it to to be that way. I also think hour-long episodes, you would need that much time, because going back to that, three films or shooting six films at once, releasing them 3 months apart, that time wise, actual like screen time is closer, I think, if they are hour-long episodes, is closer to that goal of three movies a book. Um,
3 movies a book at 90 minutes or an hour 20. And you
mhm.
go, or sorry, 90 minutes or 120 minutes. So three at 120 minutes is 6 hours.
Right, right. Well, okay, I also have a problem with how short movies are getting. Or
What do you mean, how short? Movies have been getting longer and longer and longer.
so okay, I do think in recent years I like that it's been returning to those Lord of the Rings length, Harry Potter length type things, but I feel like there was a while there where they were really starting to compress and constrict things down to less than 120 minutes, and I was
Well, first,
missing.
Alex, let me stop you there. Hang on a sec. 90 minutes
Uh-huh.
was more than adequate for a film. First, think of it in 3 acts. First act, 30 minutes. Second act, 30 minutes. Third act, 30 minutes.
sh- sure, for a lot of films, but I was getting to the point where I was sad we would never see a Lawrence of Arabia again, or Ben-Hur again, even though I have problems with the last act of Ben-Hur. But I was
There
missing
have
those
always,
4 hour epics.
I know, but there have always been epics.
Uh,
The vast majority of films do not need to be more than an hour and a half long, because one of the things, it all depends on the type of film that you're doing. A film should be as long as it needs to be,
sure.
is in essence. It shouldn't be constrained by a very specific time. But if you make a film 4 hours long, that significantly impacts your box office numbers.
Right.
Because let's say you get the first showing at 6 o'clock in the evening, Friday, 6 o'clock in the evening. People have finished work. They have run down to their local cinema. They go in at 6 and it ends at 10. Are you going to employ the cinema staff to stay open until 2 in the morning
Right.
for the next showing?
Also, for that auditorium to only be showing one film in that whole runtime. I understand the practical things. Also, like with Avatar: The Way of Water, I thought it was a very I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good sequel. Uh, Something that these new long films don't have that the classics did is are intermissions, and they need to reintroduce those, I think. A nice 10-minute orchestra, just like
Well,
intermission.
I actually, I'm trying to remember the last film. There used to be an art house cinema that we went to, and I remember going to see, I must have been Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Okay.
And there was an intermission in the middle of it where you went out, you got like a drink
Mhm.
in the lobby. People went out for their cigarette break, or stretch their legs, go to the bathroom, and that was the big thing, a bathroom break in the middle that was built into the film. Eh, Although let's face it, with a lot of um, modern films, because of the formula of them, when you can go to the bathroom and you're not going to
Right.
miss anything significant. Oh, look, the fight sequence has started. I have 5.5 minutes.
Yep.
You go out, have a wee while there's just mindless things exploding, and you go, I'll miss a couple of quippy one-liners that I think were probably in the trailer.
Yeah.
Um, and you can go to the bathroom, come back, and you actually haven't missed any story, but you've missed some of the spectacle. For someone else, they go, "No, I'm here for the spectacle. I'll go out in the talky bit because why do I really care why they're invading the Galactic Empire? I just want to see them bash each other in the head and blow things up."
Right.
And so you go out during the talky bit. It's up to the individual viewer. But the idea that films need to be 2 hours long or longer, and you're like, whoa, that's weird to me. Um, Lots of films pack an enormous emotional punch or a lot of fun into 90 minutes. It all depends on the type of film. If you have a small core cast or like a key main character that's going through their specific sequence of events, you go, it doesn't need to be 2 hours long or 3 hours long. And so it all depends again on the type of narrative that you're trying to tell.
Right.
And longer is not necessarily better. So a 4 hour version of Gardens of the Moon, yes, will contain more information than a 1.5 hour version of Gardens of the Moon.
Mm-hmm.
But a 1.5 hour version Gardens of the Moon film, you might go, right, we're going to get rid of that section. We're going to get rid of that section. We're going to focus on this section and we're really going to dial that section up. So it's not the entirety of Gardens of the Moon, but it's say the Darujistan section. Yeah. And we're dialing it up to 11 and we're going to do it this way because a lot of that was in the original screenplay. That major section. You go, well, let's go back to that idea. The original screenplay that Gardens of the Moon, the novel, was that utilized and took things from. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the original screenplay. Well, I don't think either one of them have it now, but along those lines, that would be adapting the work. And it's not including everything, but it would be a cohesive, self-contained story. Other fans have suggested the Chain of Dogs, just do the Chain of Dogs. And you go, so there goes fidelity to text.
Right.
We're just going to do the Chain of Dogs. Okay, so how would you structure the Chain of Dogs? Who are your point of view characters for the Chain of Dogs? How would you vary the tension in it? Or would you want to vary? Or where would you put in drama? Where would you put in the comedic relief? How would you do those things? Because you wouldn't just take those sequences out, stick them all together, and go, well, that's the blueprint. That's the starting point. Because from there, you would actually have to design a cohesive narrative. Because there's time jumps in that. Do you just leave the time jumps in?
Yeah. And the lens that we get for most of the Chain of Dogs is sort of, I'll try to do this in not a spoilery way, but there's cynical. A build up to him catching up to them. And the rumors or the sort of myth making and the process of what's actually happening, that is so essential, I think, to why we feel the way we feel about the Chain of Dogs. But if we're not telling a story about where this guy was and why he has to be catching up, why was he lagging behind? Why did he go somewhere else? So that they'd have to figure out another way to.
And so, but then you would go, okay, well, if we split that off, what if we had his section and then we jump back to the Chain of Dogs and then his section and the Chain of Dogs, and then eventually they meet up.
Right.
And you go, okay, so now, but a whole bunch of those sections of the Chain of Dogs were never shown. Right, so we need to write those. We're now doing, according to the internet, fan fiction. Because that was never in the book. We're now doing fan fiction. But you can see why the idea, like we all remember the Chain of Dogs and we remember it as this big sequence. But when you think about it as a contained narrative, you go, well, how do you tell it? And if you remove elements, what do you fill in with that? And yes, I remember this thing happening in the book, but no, that character's not there anymore. How do we do that? And so there are ripples and ramifications when you change anything. But even when you stick very, very closely to, say, just adapting the Chain of Dogs to make a 90-minute film that's heavily focused on that, do you completely change the perspective and have it with one of the soldiers? Let's say one of the soldiers at the beginning, who is it, List?
List, who keeps in the practice.
We're not going to give it away what happens to him, but List, who's with the Chain of Dogs from the beginning. Let's say we follow him. But that's a fundamentally different tone and style of narrative to what's in the books. So even though we'd be keeping the events the same, we've now just radically changed the type of story it is. Because now the point of view is with one of the soldiers, not with the point of view that we get in the novels. And that changes the tone, it changes the atmosphere, it changes how it is relayed, it changes everything about that. What it doesn't change is the sequence of events. But the sequence of events are quite often some of the easiest things to change in narrative. Because you go, what does that event do? What is it? What is it explaining? What is it exploring? Is there a different way to do that that would fit with this? Getting the essence of characters is usually far more important than what they look like, unless what they look like is incredibly important to the character. Most characters, their description is unimportant. But there are always going to be characters where, no, that is fundamental to the character. Malcolm X. You can't have a story about Malcolm X unless you have someone who is going to portray Malcolm X authentically.
Right. Right.
It's Buzz Lightyear. Well, it's a cartoon character.
Right.
Does it really matter exactly how Buzz looks? Not really. But you can see how it's not as simple as you just copy the book, because very rarely are the most powerful adaptations direct copies of the books. Think of The Shining. The Shining, amazing adaptation. Not exactly beloved by the author of The Shining.
Right. Right.
And you can be fans of the books, you can be fans of both. You can appreciate what each one does. But you wouldn't go, oh well, The Shining, well, that was unfaithful, and criticize. Because those changes were there to make the film better. And we don't always agree with those changes. No one is ever asking us to say, oh, that change, of course, like I'm absolutely fine. You can dislike changes. Mightn't work for you personally. But I don't think I've ever heard an interview with any writer going, yeah, I made that change just for the hell of it. Like, I didn't care. I just wanted to change things.
I just wanted to see what the fans would say. I just wanted to...
Or, you know what? This is really going to annoy the fans. I'm just going to change this thing. Like, no, that's not what writers do. Writers are looking at it and they go, this would fit with this thing, and that does that thing really well, so we'll do that. And does it work for all of us? No, there are loads of changes that get made that you go, oh, I wish they hadn't changed that, because I really love that.
Yeah.
One of the examples, the dinner sequence, chapter 9 of Gardens of the Moon, is one of my favorite scenes in the entirety of the Malazan Book of the Fall. That sequence, if it wasn't in an adaptation, I'd be upset, I'd be annoyed, I'd be disappointed. Would it ruin the adaptation? Well, no, I'd have to see what the adaptation does.
Right, what else they do.
Because,
sorry.
Because as much as I love that scene, and as much as it's so central to the things that I value in reading Gardens of the Moon, there are other ways that you could convey what you need to convey in that scene. Cut it out and just have other things happen and focus more on the big events. If you were trying to turn this into an action movie, you could do away with the dinner scene.
Sure.
Chapter. You could do away with quite a lot of it and find different ways to convey that information. And then it would be the action adventure version of Gardens of the Moon. A bit like we watched The Fellowship of the Ring, Peter Jackson's film adaptation. And you go, yeah, that's the action adventure version. But it doesn't replace The Fellowship of the Ring.
No.
But he focused on the action adventure bits. He glossed over things. He sped things up. He made all of the hobbits annoying. Does it make it a bad adaptation? No, it's a beloved film. Quite rightly, it's held up pretty well, despite some of the special effects being now very ropey. Look at them when they come out of Moria.
Yeah. And when they the green ghost army, I don't know if that really looks looks great.
But even just in Fellowship, play
Yeah.
the one sequence where they run out of Moria, and you go, anyone who thinks that the special effects are seamless throughout Jackson's movies hasn't rewatched them recently.
Yeah.
In our memory, we gloss over a lot. We create our own vision and memory out of it. Like we actually reshape the thing, and we go, oh, and we dismiss a lot of the things that we don't like. If we disliked it, we would hyperfixate sometimes on issues like that and make them bigger than they are, and anything that wasn't entirely to our liking suddenly becomes a problem. And that's always going to be the issue with adaptation. No person adapting anything will ever get something 100% right to how you imagine it in your mind. Because what you have in your head, I guarantee you, is not what is in my head. We've both read the same book. We both know what the sequence of events roughly are, but how you picture those events, how you feel about those events, the events that you choose to go, that's really important. And the events you go, oh yeah, but like I don't really care about that as much. All of those shape our understanding of story, of narrative, because we are creating the meaning. And as soon as someone else tries to get their vision down within practical constraints, using the technology of the day, involving other creatives in a group process, that vision will not be the same. Some aspects of it may transcend what we thought was possible and forever shape our vision. And Jackson's Lord of the Rings has done that for people. When you mention Legolas, a lot of people immediately think of Orlando Bloom.
Right.
Or when you say Aragorn, they think of Viggo Mortensen. For other people, they go, no, but that's just that Viggo Mortensen, not my Aragorn. Because that's not what Aragorn looks like in their mind and will never look like that. Or that's not what any of the elves look like. One of the issues I had with it, I'd seen The Matrix and then Fellowship of the Ring and Hugo Weaving, that as soon as the hobbits arrive, was, well, Mr. Baggins. And you're like, well, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Baggins, choose the red pill or the blue pill. One will take you to the minds of.
I could picture him torturing like one of them, sweat coming down their face.
And the thing is Hugo Weaving's performance bad? No.
It's great.
Because in my mind, he was Agent Smith from The Matrix.
Right.
He will never be Elrond.
Yeah.
To me. And it ruined that whole thing. It ruined that sequence. Because all I could think of was him having a conversation with Neodio,
yeah.
Neo Baggins, and going on a quest. Like it just didn't work for me. But it doesn't mean it was bad.
Maybe along those lines, are there any casting thing or any actors that you sometimes picture when you read Malazan? Anyone that's close to, or I guess conversely, is there anyone you've heard suggested for a part that you've thought, oh, that person would do a horrible job? Or...
No, I mean, anytime I've ever thought about it, because quite often, like you look at actors throughout history, and quite often you go like, oh yeah, like Sean Connery when he was in his early 40s would have been great at this role. You go, right. But first of all, I don't picture actors when I'm reading.
Okay. Yeah.
That's not how I'm reading the character, and I never think of an actual actor. It's not how the book is created in my brain. But if someone said like you're casting for it, I always go to the people who are still around, because if someone's asking for who I think would be great, I go, well, who's available? Right. If money is no option, who is currently available that we could cast? Because to me, that's what a casting is. Going, who would be a dream cast if you could go back in time to any period in an actor's life and actors who are no longer with us that we could just now cast anyway. That I don't indulge in that one as much, and it's not because I think it's not worthwhile. It's just again not how I think about it.
Sure.
And people have suggested all sorts of weird and wonderful things. I think one of the strangest things seeing people attempt castings for Gardens of the Moon
Hmm.
would be the number of Caucasian people they cast.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I'm always surprised at how white the casting for Gardens of the Moon seems to be, according to a lot of people in the fandom.
Uh-huh.
And like, even like particularly Ganos,
Hmm.
Ganos Parent, and you go, huh? I never pictured him as white.
Uh-huh.
Um, and because he's not white, Felison's not white, Tavor's not white.
Right.
And suddenly then that sort of shapes how you think of all of these characters. And instead of it's just weird then because there's a knock-on effect to that. And so sometimes when I look at casting, I mean, I always think of Darujistan being much more Middle Eastern.
Yeah, I think
And
I do too. Just those sound or the sounds of the names of things, I think bring to
and so
mind.
with that, I actually I have a tendency. I One of the weird things I think of, say, modern Egypt and Cairo, that mix, that blend, or even some of the other Middle Eastern, but that when I picture that city, it's very, very Middle Eastern, and again, very few white faces wandering
Hmm.
around. There'll always be some, but because I think the Malazan world's actually wonderfully blended, but that feels very different. Peel, I always got the impression was a much paler city. And I think it's just the connotation of the name that I always thought of Peel having lots of people, maybe of Irish descent, who
Uh,
have never seen the sun. Um, that they're all there and they're kind of all a wee bit, like me, like really, really in need of some time on a beach. That's what I think of when I think of the inhabitants of Peel. It's slightly sickly looking. Um, when I think of Malaz City, that island, I think of London
okay.
and how cosmopolitan London is.
Mhm.
Because anytime I've been at London, it is just a sea of people because it is the center of, or it used to be the center of an island nation. And that's what Malaz Island is to me.
Uh-huh.
That Malaz City was this center until it moved across to the sort of the royal court.
Yeah, yeah.
And then that brings that cosmopolitan feel across. The Nappans, again, like
Blue.
they're they're blue.
Yeah.
But it was only when Erickson started talking about that they were really blue. I went, oh, I always thought of them as just having a slight blue tint.
Yeah, yeah.
And he went, no, 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 like we're bright blue. I
Blue.
went, huh, didn't consider the jagged. Like how we imagine them in our own mind. We create this wonderful individual perspective. And by the way, when I was talking about being surprised at fans doing it, I'm not having a go at fans doing that. That's obviously how they think of the characters, and that's fine. I'm just saying it surprised me because in my head, that's not how I pictured them. Just as anytime someone goes, "Oh, this would be perfect as this character," and we all look at it and go, "Really?"
Yeah.
And it's both our interpretation of the actor, our interpretation of the character, and our ability to imagine that actor in the role. How many times have we heard an actor has been cast in a role and we all go, they are going to be, oh, there's no way that they could, oh my God, they were awesome.
Yeah.
Heath Ledger being cast as the Joker. Heath Ledger from 10 Things I Hate About You and The Knight's Tale being cast as the Joker. And everyone, oh God, this is, and from Brokeback Mountain, that Heath Ledger, oh, how is he going to do? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Because they're an actor, they act.
Right,
It's
right.
um and that's again, it's I think it's less to do with how the range of the actor, but more a way of trying to convey how we feel about characters, how we imagine characters. And that actor is usually we're using as a personification of it. Or how we think they look, and we think that actor looks like that character.
Mhm.
But obviously, character and how a character appears are two different things.
Sure. Um,
But who have you cast in your head? If there's anyone that you really sort of that sticks out.
I haven't done much, but I do when I think of Krupp, I picture again not Middle Eastern, despite I do think of most of the Phoenix Inn regulars as more Middle Eastern. But with Krupp, I picture Simon Russell Beale, um, and mostly because he played Falstaff in the Hollow Crown. I think there are BBC adaptations of the Henriade, and I think Krupp is shows himself to be kinder and more uh empathetic than Falstaff does ever. But in at first in Gardens of the Moon, when I was reading it, I don't know why I thought of those characters as being very similar, and so he just always that actor always comes to mind. Yeah, Simon Russell Beale. Have you seen those adaptations? Did you see the Death of Stalin film?
I think so.
He plays I'm blanking on the guy's name, but the guy who is having everyone killed and they execute him at the end of the film. Bar. Oh, he's like an actual like.
Oh yeah, I know who you.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But yeah, yeah.
I- and it's and again, I mean, like looking at the images of him, I'm sort of going, oh well, like he looks nothing like Krupp, and then
Right,
you go, yeah, but it's not a. Could he play Krupp? You go
right.
maybe, and it's like even some of the fan images where Krupp is an exaggerated caricature, like really round face, really
Mhm.
round body, almost that you couldn't imagine a real person looking like that and being able to function.
Right.
Um, that what was it? There was the film Spawn years ago, and the I can't remember the evil clown in it, and he sort of blows himself up, and he's waddling along, and it's clearly like he's inside a suit with his hands sticking out. And some people almost depict Krupp that way. And then you have, well, how would you do that realistically? And when you shrink him down into ordinary human dimensions, is he still Krupp? Because Krupp comes across, he's so vivacious, so more than he's bigger than he should be, larger than life. That Krupp uh, occupies a space larger than his physicality. He is one of those people that dominates the page. So how do you convey that? Do you try to just cast a very short actor, or go that route, or do you find someone who exudes the personality? And again, like all of these are decisions that have significant impact, and that no matter what you pick, some people will go, "That's terrible. Whatever were they thinking? Oh God, how could they?" And other people go, "Oh no, but that was genius." All depending on how they think about the character. Um, and again, so much of this depends on the medium, film or television. The the mode within that, is it live action or animated? The style of live action. Oh, make it like Game of Thrones, and you go, well, a lot of Game of Thrones was filmed in that very hyper realistic style and very down to earth and very gritty. How would you deal with the high magic of Malazan in that style? Would that not be tonally dissonant? Or can you ground the magic in such a way, the representation of magic in such a way that it fits with that style? Do you really want a retread of the style of Game of Thrones, but with Malazan content? Or would you prefer something that spoke more to the tone and style of Malazan? And are those two things different? The color palette is going to be radically different. Game of Thrones, very European
Yeah.
for Westeros, and yet the Orientalism of Essos, that doesn't fit with the Malazan world because you're not meant to think of the desert or the steppes or the tundra or the glaciers in the Malazan world as othered. It's meant to be normal. So you would have to be very careful about how you framed it and how you showed it. That it was actually different. It's not meant to be the stranger in a strange land. It's meant to be, no, we're meant to be at home here. So it has to feel more lived in. And like these are all things that tie into art direction and set design and costume design and all of these things. Really important lessons to learn from Game of Thrones. The weathering of clothing, the wearing on the costumes to make them look lived in. I think that is something, and it was Jackson obviously did a lot of that for Lord of the Rings. That is something every fantasy show should do. Every single one of them. Oh, you have a costume? Put it in that big tumble thing over there with some sand in it so it gets scratched and worn. Because that should not look like it came out of a costume shop. It shouldn't look brand new unless you're making a statement. And you know, it's all of these. Do you want the magic to look wondrous? Do you want it to look gimmicky? Do you want it to look powerful? Do you want it to look scary? How do you convey that? And no matter what anyone picks, it's not going to work for everyone.
Yeah. Hi everyone, sorry if the video just ended a little bit abruptly there. This is Books with Banks in his editing phase, or in the editing phase, and because of the length of this conversation, this wonderful conversation, I've decided to split this into two parts. As you've probably noticed by the title and thumbnail, this was only part one of the conversation a Critical Dragon and I had about adapting Malazan. So look forward to, or I hope you'll look forward to part two of this video coming out in a few days. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one. Bye.